Jesus promises that whatever we ask in His name, He will do. But Greg, I've been praying this way. Why isn't God answering my request? This is Real Questions Real Quick. I'm Pastor Greg with Westside Bible Church, a fellowship that meets on the Arizona Christian University campus. So why is God not answering your prayers? There's a little saying that goes something like this. When the request is not right, God says no. When we are not right, God says grow. When the time is not right, God says slow. And when everything is all right, God says go. Let me expand on that just a little bit right now. When the request is not right, God says no. In Matthew chapter 20, we see Salome, the mother of James and John, the disciples. And she comes and kneels before Jesus and says, "In your kingdom, please let my two sons sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." And Jesus answered by saying to them, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I'm about to drink?" Speaking of his death. And then their ignorance, they're like, "Well, we are able." But then Jesus replies and says, "I have no right to say who will sit on my right and on my left. My Father has prepared those places for the ones He has chosen." Now, I'm sure Salome and the boys left that encounter confused. "You told us anything we ask in your name." But a couple days later, Jesus is crucified, and there is Salome with Jesus' mother Mary at the foot of the cross, and they see Jesus hanging between the two thieves, one on his left and one on his right. And she remembers. And she says, "I asked for what?" See, sometimes God says no. And no is as much of an answer as yes. But God sometimes says no because what you're asking for is not what's not best for you. It's not in His plans for you. So when the request is not right, God says no. When we are not right, God says grow. 1 Samuel chapter 1, we meet a man named Elkanah, a godly man who has two wives, one named Peninnah, who has many children, and another one called Hannah, who's barren. Year after year, they come to the tabernacle, and Hannah prays for a child, but she just can't get pregnant. But one year they come, and they go to Shiloh, to the tabernacle, and Hannah did what was her custom. She poured her heart out before God and wept bitterly. However, this time she made a vow. She said, "O Lord, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime." And we read, the Lord remembered her plea, and in due time she gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel. Sometimes we are waiting on the Lord, we think, but in reality, He's waiting on us. As He was waiting on Hannah to get to the place where she would finally say, "I'll give him back to you." And the Lord was able to bless her far beyond what she was able to ask or even think. God says, "I have plans that go beyond what you can imagine." And Greg, your perspective is so limited, your understanding so small, so I'm waiting on you to get to that place where I can bless you. So when the request is not right, God says no. When we are not right, God says grow. When the time is not right, God says slow. Another childless couple, Zechariah and Elizabeth. They were both way beyond the age of bearing children at this point. They weren't even asking God anymore for a child. And Zacharias is a priest, and he's ministering in the temple when the angel Gabriel appears to him and says, "God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will give you a son." And he's like, "Heard my prayers? My wife is beyond 50. We haven't prayed for a child in over a decade." And because of his unbelief, Zechariah was stricken mute. For God said, "My word will certainly be fulfilled in the proper time." See, God was waiting for the right timing for John to be born. And the answer to Zechariah and Elizabeth's prayers was postponed until the proper time. And so may be the case in your situation, that what you've been praying for, God's waiting for the right timing. So when the request is not right, God says no. When we are not right, God says grow. When the time is not right, God says slow. And when everything is right, God says go. Let me wrap this up by saying all prayers are answered. I mean, at an even deeper level than what we've been talking about. Because the primary purpose of prayer is intimacy, fellowship, communion with the Lord. It's about drawing close to Him. And no matter if we get what we're asking for, we can always get close to Him. Hit the follow button if you're not following us yet, the like button if you want more of these videos, and share it with a friend. And we'll see you at the next Real Questions Real Quick.